there's somewhat of a dead end with science. Maybe dead end isn't the right word, but it's trying to put everything into an objective view, removing the subjective experience.
Yeah.
But all experience is subjective.
Absolutely.
There's not an experience one can have that
Absolutely.
isn't filtered through these, five senses and the mind. So I think that these Eastern traditions have developed a type of science that explores the subjective self.
Yeah.
And that's one of the great contributions that they've had is exploring this nature of the self. But they have different views on what that is. In Buddhism, there's, even among different Buddhist traditions, there's different views on what the self is. So I'm curious what it means to be oneself in that context. It's obviously a deep question, but what is the nature of the self, and how does that the understanding of the self affect our experience?
Okay, so the various bits to this. So the first thing is this word truth. It's very interesting, this. So scientia is the study of truth. That's what it means. And the Greeks knew about experimental science, but they never did it, because they said, if you tinker about, you will not get scientia. You'll only see yourself. So the Greeks knew about experimental philosophy, they just didn't do it. So one of the problems, I think, with the way science is presented, more by journalists actually than by scientists, honestly, is that somehow modern science is scientia, but it's not, because it's experimental. So inevitably, it's going to mirror the intentions of the experimenter. And of course, now with quantum mechanics, this is now in common parlance. Everybody understands this now. We're seeing ourselves. Now, if you go to scientia, it's a different thing. Then you're talking about, how do I engage? Now, when you look at different traditions, they have different views of how to engage. That's true. And you can't objectify those views. They belong within their own traditions. So one of the things that's happened is, because most of Western contemporary culture is Semitic and comes from the Semitic religions, which are largely revealed religions, they look at the Asian traditions and think, well, they must be revealed as well, so there's some sort of book they're all reading from or something. That's not the case at all. In fact, the word religion is really a poor word for most of the Asian traditions. They're lineages, is what they actually are. And if you say, take the Gupta emperors, for example, in 5th century or 4th century India, they were supporters of Buddhism and Hinduism. That wasn't because they were broad-minded. It was because there was a lineage of Buddhism and there was a lineage of Hinduism, and they kind of wanted to see how they worked. It wasn't a religion in the way we understand the word. And indeed, I don't think Buddhism is a religion at all. It's a lineage. A lineage of what is the question? Now, of course, I can only speak with any confidence about the Buddha Dharma. I can't speak with confidence about the other Asian traditions. But one of the key insights within the Buddha Dharma is that we construct our experience. Now, of course, constructivist psychology is built on this idea now, but this is a very, very ancient idea. We're not a camera. We construct our experience, and our experience is conditioned by that process of construction. So if we look for something out there, we're unconsciously conditioning what we're looking for, because it's actually a construct. We're not really seeing the thing it is. We're seeing the thing that we've named and recognized and all the rest of it before we get to it. So it's fundamental to understand this process of construction. That's true of all the Buddhist traditions, and it's also true of Neo-Vedanta, and it's true of Taoism, that many of the traditions have this insight that somehow we are profoundly involved with what I suppose you could call the here and now, or the world, both terms of which are actually references to a constructed reality. It's not to say there's not a reality, it's just to say the bit of reality we get is conditioned by us. So we're still looking in a mirror. Now, none of these traditions are experimental in the true sense. That's to say, we don't do experiments and see what happens. They're lineages in which there are sets of meditation exercises and sets of practices that change perception, because perception is a construct. And so if you change the way you breathe, or you visualize something new, or you do something else, it will change the way you view the world. That demonstrates to you that what you're experiencing is a construct. The question is, what do you do then? Now, this is where there is a difference. So the Buddha was famously called the teacher of gods and men. So it's not atheistic. That's a complete misunderstanding. It totally believed in beings, spiritual beings who are what I suppose you could call gods. But the difference is that Buddhism would say, oh, those beings are also in a construct. They're in a very nice construct, I might say, but they're in a construct. And ultimately, there is a state that's non-constructed. That's called nirvana. That's a non-constructed state. And the basic tenet of all Buddhist schools is that state is somehow self-knowing. That's to say, being and knowing are one in that state. Now again, Sat Chitananda, there it is in Hinduism. Be with the Tao, there it is in Taoism. It's the same insight. It's just this fundamental understanding of how we get there that may differ.
Is this the same as Rigpa? Like, is that
Yeah,
pointing
you could.
to the same thing?
Yeah, you could use that word.
Yeah,
and
they're all pointing to this
they're
same
all pointing
unconstructed state.
They are. Now, the key is how do we discriminate between what appears to be a seamless display of the world and an unconstructed knowing? How do we ever do that? They're mixed together. This is our problem. We have direct intuitions, everybody does. And we also have profoundly conditioned intuitions, everybody does. The challenge is how do we separate the two? And this is what the Asian wisdom traditions do. They say, hey, until you separate out these two aspects of your own experience, you will be confused because you'll never know if you're dealing with a constructed thing or an unconstructed thing. And so you go round and round in circles, blindly, unable to deal with it. So the first step in all these traditions is you have to learn to work with your own perception. You must. If you don't get to grips with how you are processing feeds you get from your senses, if you don't get to grips with that, you're completely, hopelessly lost. And you can worship, you can do all kinds of things, you can even have big experiences, but you'll still be lost because you really don't understand how you're being conditioned. So the first step always is to calm down and start understanding at least one of the modalities through which we experience. And so these are called the ayatanas in Buddhism, the sense gates. So the idea is you calm down and you work with one of the sense gates and you learn to see how experience arises. Now there's a very interesting word in English called recognition. It's really interesting. Clearly, it's a deep intuition within the language. We cognize, which means something arises at a sense gate, like a touch or a smell or an object, and then we recognize and say, oh, it's one of those. Between cognition and recognition is the entirety of the spiritual path. That's where it lies. What you cognize is unconstructed. What you recognize is constructed. And you can actually separate them physiologically. It's quite possible to separate those two things out. It takes about 200 milliseconds, actually, to go from cognition to recognition. And in that process, all the conditioning, all the ideas, all the stuff gets laid on top of the cognition in the recognition. Now, that recognition is associated with naming. Normally, we say, oh, it's one of those. I recognize that. We're using it in our common language. But that process of recognition is a profound construction. If we begin to get to grips with it and learn not to react to the construct, but quieten so we can see the original cognition, we find we're only processing 5% of what's available. Most of it's being filtered out. Now, God, Lord, every week there's another article about this. There was one 2 days ago in Google, big discovery. The brain is predicting what happened based upon what it experienced 5 minutes ago. Yeah, I mean, this is not exactly news. But the fact is that the constructivist program in psychology is recapitulating this insight bit by bit by bit and realizing profoundly the process of recognition is a process in which we lay the past on the present and recognize it. Now, if you think about that, if your past is guiding your present, you're going to go round and round and round in circles. which is called samsara. That is quite literally what it means.
Yeah.
We're going round and round in circles. And the older you get, the more narrow that series of circles becomes. So you know one thing, you know it well, but you can't do anything else because, and that's what getting old is. So a lot of the exercises that are in these traditions is to broaden out and slow down so we can start to see recognition. What sees recognition? Innate intelligence sees recognition. Once you do that, your innate intelligence can start to operate without being conditioned. Now, this is where the fundamental ground is. Call it Satchitananda, call it Rigpa, call it the Tao, whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. Call it the grace of God, it's fine. But that fundamental ground is what everybody is going for, in the hope that if they could reside there, then although they would use their recognition, just like science uses knives, you would use your recognition to do things and identify things, you would find yourself in a state of cognitive freedom. You call that freedom wisdom, you can call it liberation, call it whatever you like. It's just a name for a state in which the conditioned is not the first thing that happens to you. So if you live in recognition, if you have an experience, that appears to be the first thing, but it isn't. It's a recognition. The first thing is lost. When you start recovering the first thing, then your recognitions become tools. And you suddenly go, wow, I've got all these choices I didn't know were available to me. I'm free of my own trap. And that is quite literally, the other meaning of nirvana is nirvana, prison. I'm free of a prison, which is my own recognitive, I call it reflexive reactivity. It's the reflex of recognizing before cognizing. And this seems to me to be a fundamental unity behind all the Asian traditions. And the path of meditation, that's its primary aim, to get there. Once you've got there, all kinds of things become possible. But until you get there, you're just in a hall of mirrors where all you're seeing is yourself in various ways.